I do hope that somebody does run in the primary against the president. I think the Republicans need to be reminded of what conservatism really is and what it means to be decent.
Republican Senator Jeff Flake retiring from the Senate this year. Will he be a candidate in 2020? We're going to talk about that in a bit. We want to introduce him now. Senator Flake, thanks for joining us this morning. I do want to get to that, but let's begin with the news of the day. Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist who has disappeared in the Turkish embassy. You heard Larry Kudlow right there saying the president's saying he's going to take severe action. What should be done?
Well, severe action needs to be taken, and I think the Congress will take it upon themselves to take that action if it turns out, as the press reporting seems to indicate, that Saudi Arabia was involved.
But you say they're going to take some kind of action. The president has ruled out, it appears, stopping the arms sales to Saudi Arabia. I know you were against stopping the arms sales in the past. Does this kind of a violation, if indeed the Saudis were behind the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, should that stop U.S. arms sales?
I do think that arms sales will be affected. Certainly our involvement in Yemen with Saudi Arabia will be affected. That involvement barely survived in the last go-around with the National Defense Authorization Act. It certainly won't survive with this kind of accusation if it is true.
You say if it is true. Jamal Khashoggi was seen going into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. He was never seen coming out. That was over a week ago now. Is there any other explanation at this point?
There sure doesn't seem to be. The Saudi Arabia government has been asked, the ambassador has been asked directly to bring information back. They haven't done so. Their explanation that their closed-circuit television just streamed and didn't record just isn't plausible. There's just no good explanation, and I think they know it. I wouldn't be surprised to hear different explanations coming out of the Saudi government very soon. The explanations that, frankly, won't make much sense, that it was done by lower-level folks and that MBS didn't have any involvement. That's what I would expect to come next.
Let's talk about President Trump. We've seen him out on the campaign trail pretty consistently over the last week. One of the issues he started to raise again is the return of the family separation policy. Let's take a look.
Now everybody wants to come in, and they come in illegally, and they use children. In many cases, the children aren't theirs. They grab them, and they want to come in with the children. So we're looking at a lot of different things having to do with illegal immigration. I will say this, if they feel there will be separation, they don't come.
So the president's talking about bringing that policy back in some form. It comes as we have this new poll out this morning showing Democrats now have a huge edge on immigration over Republicans. Is the president making a mistake here?
Yes, he is. We shouldn't bring that policy back. That simply is un-American. Everybody recognized that. The president seemed to. Certainly the First Lady and others spoke directly against it. So I hope that we don't return to that policy.
Let's talk about Justice Kavanaugh. You ended up voting for Justice Kavanaugh confirmation on the Supreme Court. He took his seat on the court. But now in our new poll, 50% of Americans say the Judiciary Committee you sat on didn't do enough to investigate. More than 50% support more investigation by the new Congress. Are you concerned that Americans see this whole confirmation process and perhaps the court itself now tainted?
Well, that was my concern when we finished the process and were about to vote in the Judiciary Committee. And that's why I requested, or basically demanded, that we have an FBI investigation to look further into this. We had that. I know a lot of people wanted it to be more broad. I would have liked to have started it earlier and had it more broad. But it was a good investigation. I think we're in a better place than we would have been. And I don't think that we should move forward, the Congress certainly, with additional investigations, either into the leak that occurred, that allowed a lot of the back and forth to go between Democrats and Republicans, or certainly trying to remove Justice Kavanaugh from the court, as some of the Democrats have said that they would do.
That's your counsel to Congress. How about your counsel to Justice Kavanaugh? How should he handle himself on the bench going forward?
Well, he gave a very gracious and magnanimous speech at the White House after he was confirmed, and if you look at his record on the circuit court, everyone on the circuit court, those who worked with him, clerks, his colleagues, said that he was courteous, and there was nothing but good decorum and temperament during that entire time. And I think that that's how he will act on the court. So I think we can move on. It was an awful process, frankly, for all of us. Nobody wants to go through something like this again. But it was nice to see everyone from the court, those appointed by Republicans, those appointed by Democrats, all there to welcome him on the court, and that's a good thing.
We just saw Larry Kudlow downplay the UN's findings on climate change. We've seen dramatic shifts in how Republicans think about climate change over the last several years. Are they going in the wrong direction?
I think so. I think that there's been more recognition among Republicans. The administration hasn't taken the view of some of us that this is something we really need to deal with. I hope that we can move along with the rest of the world and address this. It's going to be challenging. Obviously, that report that came out is pretty dire, but there are things that we can do and should do. And I think Republicans need to be at the forefront if we want to keep our place and seats.
Talk about seats. Let's talk about the midterm elections. We showed you talking about your hope for a primary challenge to President Trump as a way to bolster conservative values. So I wonder what you make of the argument of George Will, good conservative, who said conservatives should actually vote for Democrats in the midterms as a check on President Trump.
Well, I hope that Republicans, certainly in the Senate, we're concerned about the investigation, making sure that it continues. The House Republicans have taken a little different position publicly, but the Senate, gratefully, the Senate Intel Committee has acted in a bipartisan fashion to make sure that we move forward, that Bob Mueller concludes his investigation on his timing, not ours. So I think that Republicans need to provide that check. That's what our system of government does. And I hope that they can without a change in who controls Congress. But I think that may be coming if you believe the conventional wisdom, and I kind of do. The House will likely flip. The Senate will remain in Republican hands.
Jeff Flake, thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me on.
Let's bring in Senator Bernie Sanders now from Vermont this morning. Senator Sanders, thanks for joining us. We just heard Senator Flake talk about the midterm elections right there. I think he thinks he wants Republicans to provide the check on President Trump. You're going to be out on the campaign trail in these final 22, 23 days. What's your closing message?
My closing message is that we have to end one-party rule in Washington. Right now you have a president, we have leadership in the House and the Senate working overtime for the needs of the wealthiest people in this country, turning their backs on working families. Look, you have a Congress that came within one vote, led by President Trump, of throwing 32 million Americans off of the health insurance they have. You have a Congress led by the president that voted to give over $1 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1% at a time of massive income and wealth inequality and drive the deficit way up. You got a president who introduced a budget that would have cut Medicaid by over a 10-year period by $1 trillion, Medicare by $500 billion, Social Security Disability Fund by $72 billion. That's got to change. And by the way, you raised the issue, George, of climate change. And the comments a moment ago that Larry Kudlow made are so irresponsible, so dangerous, that it's just hard to believe that a leading government official could make them. What the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said is that we have 12 years to substantially cut the amount of carbon in our atmosphere, or this planet, our country, the rest of the world, is going to suffer irreversible damage. We are in crisis mode, and you have an administration that virtually does not even recognize the reality of climate change, and their policies working with the fossil fuel industry are making a bad situation worse.
You mentioned right at the top that you will say we should get rid of one-party rule in Washington. The president has said that it's going to be replaced by mob rule. That's been backed up by an ad the Republicans are now running. I want to take a look.
When they go low, we kick.
You cannot be civil with a political party that wants to destroy what you stand for, what you care about.
Get up and, please, get up in the face of some Congress people.
The left, he calls it an unhinged mob. Are you worried the Democrats, you heard those quotes right there in the ad, are falling into a trap laid by President Trump?
Look, I mean, I think one of the problems that we have is that there is very little civil discourse going on in politics today. And you have a president who I think most people recognize is a pathological liar. The Republicans have very little to say that they can defend, so a lot of the ads they're running are very personal, very deceptive, very dishonest. They're running all over the country. Look, the issue is not quote-unquote mobs. In my view, what this whole election will come down to is whether we can mobilize people to come out and vote. 4 years ago, as you'll recall, George, when the Republicans won landslide victories all over this country, we had the lowest voter turnout since World War II. So if people are sick and tired of working longer hours for low wages, not able to afford their prescription drugs, not able to afford to send their kids to college, tired of tax breaks for billionaires, you got to come out and vote. You got to stand up and say enough is enough. We don't need one party, right-wing party, controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House.
The president's saying that if the Democrats get control, people like you, he calls you Crazy Bernie, are going to take over and try to turn the United States into Venezuela.
Right. Well, you know, what can we say about a president who literally does not go a day without saying massive lies? So let's talk about what Bernie would do. Yeah, Bernie would like to end a situation in which we remain the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people. And Bernie wants to expand and improve the Medicare program so that seniors now have dental care and have hearing aids and now have vision care that they don't have right now. Bernie wants to end the absurdity of hundreds of thousands of bright young kids not being able to afford to go to college and millions leaving school deeply in debt. Bernie thinks it's more important to invest in the needs of our infrastructure and our working families rather than giving tax breaks to billionaires and large profitable corporations. Bernie thinks that we should raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and I'm proud of the work that many of us did in helping to raise that wage at Amazon. 350,000 workers now are going to be making at least $15 an hour. So what Bernie wants to do is to have a government that represents all of us, not just wealthy campaign contributors. Now, Trump may not like that, but I think most Americans want to see us move in that direction.
Does Bernie think that President Trump should be impeached if Democrats take control?
Bernie thinks that right now we got 3 weeks to go, and we should not be deflected from our mission. And what our mission now is to rally the American people, make sure that people come out and vote so that we can recapture the House and hopefully the Senate as well.
Before we go, what should the United States do about Saudi Arabia and the disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi?
Well, I was glad to hear Senator Flake make a point about ending the war in Yemen. I introduced a resolution with Senator Lee, a conservative Republican, that said that the Saudi-led war in Yemen, of which the United States is supporting, is unconstitutional. There was no authorization for it. It is a humanitarian disaster. So probably the most significant thing we should do is to end our involvement in the Saudi-led war in Yemen.
Senator Sanders, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you, George.